All right, so let's get started, guys. Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at right now. In this session, I wanted to use as big of a font as I could, just to make myself look a little more important. So this is Data Cleansing with SSIS. And my name is Brian Knight. I'm the founder of Pragmatic Works. My email address is on the screen right now. It's bknight@pragmaticworks.com. We have a great size audience today, so I really appreciate you guys coming today. So a little about myself before we begin. My Twitter address is @BrianKnight, where I'm out of Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm a SQL Server MVP, which basically means a whole bunch of things, but mostly it means I wasn't good with girls. I also am the founder of Pragmatic Works, and which is a BI company that focuses on training, on services, and also tools as well. We have I've done about 13 SQL Server books, and we have running actually 3 or 4 this year on Denali as well. And lastly, I blog at a website called bidn.com, and that is a BI Developer Network, in case you're curious. All of my slides are posted there actually right now, and if you're looking into comments of my slides, you'll see a whole bunch of goodies inside there, like my coding examples that I'm using today. So all the code is in the notes of my slides. Feel free to go ahead and steal it and do whatever you want to with it. So the key takeaways for today, we're going to show you how to profile data. Now to the question earlier, that will be 08. The rest of the session will be all in 05 or in SQL Server 08. We'll talk about how to cleanse and validate data with SSIS, and then we'll talk about how to use that really neat technology that not a whole lot of people use, the fuzzy techniques, to really take your cleansing to a whole new level. We're going to talk about data deduplication. How do we validate the data, and how do we cleanse the data? And I'll talk about some free components you can get on the web to help you do all of that. So to begin with, let's start with some data profiling. I have about 150 slides to get through in this hour session, so I better talk very, very fast. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I have 9 slides to cover, and the rest is all demo. So this session, just before you guys ask, the session is being recorded. You'll be able to find the recordings on pragmaticworks.com under webinars. And that will be after about 8 or 9 hours. That session will be posted there. So if you want to work through my examples with me, you can watch the recording and kind of play them back later. So let's start with data profiling. So as you can imagine, data profiling becomes extremely important. 60% of you guys said you're getting bad data from the host, from whatever the source system is. So as you can imagine, data profiling for you guys becomes extremely important when it comes to cleansing. So before we start to load this data into the source, into our destination, we want to make sure this data is actually decent to begin with. So we can do that a few ways, and SSIS has some components built into it now in 2008. Now in Denali, Denali being the next version of SQL Server, they're taking these components to a brand new level. So there's a whole set of data cleansing components in Denali that are really, really amazing. Unfortunately, we don't have the code for that yet to show. The code will be available for that in the March timeframe. So let's kind of get into this here. So first of all, there's a data profiling task that's built into SQL Server 2008. And this is going to help you retrieve all the metadata about your data. It'll let you know how many nulls you have. What is the min and max data range? It'll help you identify all those data issues. What are the potential primary keys that you may have? Those types of things. Matter of fact, let's hop out now and show the task. So I'm going to hop out, and I'm going to go to my profile package here. Now I'm using the AdventureWorks data source here, and I'll provide these packages on my blog later today also. The code's not done yet until we finish today. So I'm going to open up the data profiling task in the control flow. Now, by the way, for this session in general, I'm assuming that you already know what a control flow is, what a data flow is. This is really a intermediate to advanced session. So we're not going to cover the beginner SSIS pieces. There's some great sessions on our website right now for that if you wanted to watch those sessions to kind of get yourself recapped. But for the most part, we're assuming that you already know SSIS when we do this. I'm not going to cover some of the basics. So in the data profiling task, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to actually write this data, whatever data I profile, I want to write that to an XML file. We can also go to a variable if we wanted to as well. Let me turn on my Zoom It tool here. All right, so I'm going to go to a flat file connection here, and I'll pick just a connection of some sort. I'll just put this this file will be, I'll call it C:\presentation, and I'll call it my profile. .xml. All right, we can call that whatever. Now, what I've used this for in the past is basically to profile some data that's coming in from a vendor. So it's in staging, I profile the data, but before I actually load that data into production, I'll profile it and make sure that the data quality is at an approved state. So next I'll hit the Quick Profile button on the bottom. What this does is it's going to create a new ADO.NET connection. So let me just go over to my local host, and I'm going to pick the AdventureWorks database. Okay, now that we have that done, it only works in ADO.NET, by the way, which is what you see down here in the bottom right. And I'm going to look at in my case, the customers. Let's see our customers and find out some information about those customers. The first thing I want to know is how many nulls I have. The second thing, maybe some statistics about those customers, like some of the value, how the values are distributed, how many unique rows I have, what is the length of the rows, the columns. And we also can get other things like what are the primary key candidates, what are the foreign key candidates, a whole bunch of goodies. We can also add more than one table. So I can hit the Quick Profile button again and go the whole process over again to add the same table again. After we do that, I'll slide over. You can notice that we can actually configure each of these components here. So if I want to look at the column length distribution, I can kind of slide down, and there's a whole bunch of extra advanced properties we can choose as well. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to run this component for the time being. Now, what this is going to do for us is going to run some extensive queries against this table. And it may take some time to do this. Okay, that's not what I expected. Let's see our error. So now I'm going to show you how to debug in SSIS. It looks like I cannot find the path presentation. Doesn't like that folder name for some reason. It's always the simple stuff in life, isn't it? Let me double check to make sure this file exists. Let's call it put C:\\. Let's try this again. I thought I had a good folder. Now this takes a few seconds to run, and what it's going to do for me now is if I open up the data profiling tool, and the data profiling viewer is going to be under your SQL Server 2008 folder. I'm looking for SQL Server 2008. In my case, it's R2, but it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to go to Integration Services, and there's a data profile viewer right here. Next, I'm going to open up the XML file that I've created. I called it my profile.xml. And this gives me a viewer of the XML. So you could have also used an XML task following that to scan that data, this file, and see does it meet the quality standards that you have. Now in my case though, I want to see the candidate primary key. So it's showing me here in this case, these are the primary key candidates. I can have also set the advanced properties as if it's 97% is good enough. I can also see the distribution of my data. So address line 2, most of my rows looks like to be about 5 characters long. But if I select 12 characters, I can see the 2 rows that actually fit that criteria. As I go down again, I'll see the nulls. So my middle name columns are mostly null. I can double click on that again, and I'm looking at the rows that are actually null. And so on and so on. Give me the distribution of the data, my yearly income distribution. So this helps you kind of explore the data before you're ready. So if I like commute distance, for example, here's a breakdown in commute distance. So this is helping me kind of figure out how good my data is prior to loading it to my destination. And all this data is explorable. We can also access it through the XML task as a variable or as a file as well. Okay, this is using the 2008 version of SQL Server. 2008, the Denali version is actually have a lot more features in it. Okay, so let me close this down, and let's go back to our slides again. Okay, there we go. So in that demo, I showed you how to use a data profiling task to make it much, much easier to look at your data prior to loading it. In our next component, next section, what I want to do is cover the scripting in SSIS, which is where a lot of the stuff that you really have to do on a regular basis has to get done. So if you're a DBA out there and you're not familiar with scripting in SSIS, it's one of those things you're going to have to learn. Unfortunately, I came from a DBA background also, and in DTS, you could have gotten away with not knowing how to script. But as you get more advanced stuff in SSIS, you're definitely going to want to invest a little bit of time in learning VB.NET or C#, just enough to where you can be dangerous. So this next piece really here is there is inside of SSIS there is scripting, whether it be VB.NET in 2005 or in 2008 VB.NET and C#. You can do scripting in task, or you can also script as a source, a transform, or a destination. So for example, the people that said that you don't trust your source data, we can use the script transform to cleanse that data as it comes through the component. We can also use a script source to read components that we can never read before. So we've developed components like a Twitter source, for example, and that uses a script source. And that script source allows us to read data right out of Twitter. So kind of some cool stuff we can do with the scripting in SSIS. Now, a few of the things it's going to help us do here is going to help us to cleanse the data with much more advanced things than derived columns can do. So typically we're going to use things like derived columns to cleanse this. This will take your data cleansing to a whole new level. It'll also help you validate the data to make sure you can use things like regex to make sure this column that you're seeing is actually an email address. It also helps you read from very unusual data sources like Twitter, like vSAM, like really crazy sources that you typically would not be able to read from in the past. All right, enough slides. Let's get into our demo. So in this demo, what we're going to do is we're going to do a few things. We want to cleanse some data coming out of a source. I've already created a package with a data flow, and this data flow has a source. Its source has some pretty raw data. So let's look at this raunchy data. So if I'm opening a source up, I have a few rules that I want to apply. I want to pull out all the non-numbers out of this product number here. That should only be numbers inside that field. I also, or alphanumeric numbers. I also want to slide over to the right, and another rule that I want to do is I want to validate some data. So I want to make sure the cell start date is actually a date. And as you can see in the cell start date, we have some suspect rows. So for example, this happens to be a lot reading data out of the mainframe. The mainframe, for some reason in this case, did not validate the dates. So I have February 31st. I guess it's a double leap year that year. And we also have the 13th month of the year. So before I load this data in the SQL Server, I want to validate and make sure that this data is actually live, real data. So those are the two pieces I want to fix, the product number and to validate the date and maybe assign a new value to it. Maybe I'll assign a value of today's date or null or something like that to it. It's all based on your business rules. All right, so we've seen a flat file source. I'm going to skip this piece, and I'm going to focus now on just the code to make this happen. Okay, a good question here from Mike. Is IntelliSense available in the scripting language for SSIS? It actually is, and it's going to write most of the code for me. So let's actually drag over the script component, and let's do just that. So I'm going to drag over a script component, and as you can see, it's going to ask me, do I want it to be a source, a transform, or a destination? I'll hit OK. I'll wire these two bad boys up, and I'm going to double-click on the script component. Okay, now I want to read some data out of this first. So the data I want to read into the script is going to be my product number and also my, let's call this a sales start date. Now on top of that, I'm going to make these read-write values so I can write to them, and I want to add one more column. So I want to do what drive column does, where I can add new columns. So the column I'm going to add is suspect row. So in other words, if this date here is suspect, I want to flag this row as a problem row. To do that, I'm going to go to Input-Output Columns. I'm going to expand this, and I'm going to hit Add Column. And I'm going to call this Suspect Row. And I'll make this a Boolean true-false kind of statement. Okay, so I'm created a brand new column, and I already have the two columns that I'm having. Everything else gets passed right through. Okay, so a question here from Mike. The question is, does the script task perform as well as the derived column? Unfortunately, it does not. The derived column transform is going to perform much better than the script components. You do not want to use a script component if you can do the same thing in the derived column transform. All right, so let's go to edit the script and let's take a look at that. The reason why, by the way, is it's going to be more of a row-by-row operation. Even though it's fast, it's doing it not as fast as we can. Oh, did we lose audio? Rachel, are we okay on audio?
I can hear you fine. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
No problem.
So in many cases, you'll lose the audio on your side. The internet flakes out on your side also. All right, so if I go down here, I want to write some code to ultimately cleanse this data. So let's start by looking at that suspect row first of all. So I want to look at the date, the cell start date. And to the question about the IntelliSense, here are the three methods that you really care about the most in the scripting language. The pre-execute is run before all the code runs. The post-execute is running after the block of code runs, where we can set variables and whatnot. And the row by row is happening right here, the process input row. This is what's running as it scrubs your data. It's pretty fast. It's not as fast as derived column, but it is pretty darn fast for what you're doing. All right, so let's take a look at this real quick. So I'm going to say, I want to validate to make sure that the cell start date is actually a date. So if I write a quick statement here, which you can steal off the web, the nice thing about most scripting in SSIS, you can steal it off the web. So what I want to do is I want to validate, is this a date? See how IntelliSense is running all the code for me? Now to access that column for that row, I'm going to say row dot, and I'll say cell start date. So in other words, if that is a date, is equal to false. So if it's not a date, then, and see IntelliSense kicked in there, I'm going to make that suspect row column, suspect row column, there we go, is going to be equal to true. And I'm going to make the cell start date equal to, how about I'll just put 1/1/2099, some arbitrary date like that in the future. Okay, so some simple script like that will ultimately handle, yes, we have not fixed all of our coding here, of course. We could write the same code in C# as well. I'm a VB person, unfortunately, so my C# skills are not nearly as good. I could definitely write this in C#, but not as well. I, of course, have not handled my nulls. So a lot of people pointing out good pieces of information inside this, so I need to wrap this in the is null statement and all those kind of things. So, but at its core, this is going to hopefully help us get going. Now, we also want to validate. Now, this is it for the row piece. What I can do also is I can say put an else statement here, and I can say row.suspect row is equal to false. So in other words, if it's a good date, if it's a bad date, then let's make a suspect row true and set a date. If it's otherwise, let's keep the date and let's set the row suspect to false. Now the next piece I want to do is I ultimately want to check the data coming in, and I want to scrub out certain values. So think to yourself how you can accomplish that. So obviously there's some components in SSIS that can do it, but they're all third-party components. I want to do things a little bit the harder way right now, and I want to scrub the data and remove things that are not alphanumeric characters from my product number. So what I'm going to do, I want to copy some code in first of all, make this a little bit simpler on myself so you guys don't have to watch me code. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, up top here, I'm going to change my import section. This basically allows me to bring in the coding language for some objects. So I'm going to go imports, and I'm going to do system.text.regular expressions. The regular expression language, and there's some great regular expressions out there you can download. There's tens of thousands of them out there for free that you can download. They're basically data validation techniques, or they can also be used for data replacement techniques also. But our goal here is going to be to ultimately replace those numbers. I can use this to validate it as an email address valid or as a date valid. There's lots of things we can, but it's looking for formatting of our data. So after my end if here, I want to do some logic to fix my other objects as well. So to do that, I'm just going to copy some code over and make this much simpler for us all. There we go. Again, the code I'm copying over is in the notes of my slide. Here we go. Let me zoom in and kind of show you what this is doing. As you can see, we can check for nulls. Very simple right here. We should check for nulls in our other data as well. But that's all it's doing is saying if this is not null, if the data is not null, then let's go ahead and run this code underneath. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that I'm setting a pattern. This is my regex pattern. And in this case, the regex pattern is saying I'm only allowing 0 to 9. I can also say I want to allow alphanumeric characters. So let's take 0 to 9, or A through Z, or capital A through Z. We can make this very granular. In this case, it's going to remove everything that's not alphanumeric now. So the next piece that's important is going to be this regex replace. As you can see, what I'm doing is I'm basically replacing the product number, and I'm removing anything that's not in the pattern with blank. So it's really that simple. There are full VB works here, though. So anything that you could do in VB or C# in 2008 pretty much works here as well. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, All your language works here. The only thing that does not work for scripting is going to be things like breakpoints. While you can select the breakpoint right here and actually trigger it, inside the data flow you cannot trigger breakpoints. Only inside the control flow, unfortunately. So let me close this and hit OK. And let's take a look at the data as it comes out. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to, rather than have to write the data somewhere, I'm going to go to a destination that will basically be a dead end. In my case, it's a Terminator destination. This is a free component you can get off the web. It's on our website. It's part of the Task Factory Community Edition. And I just want to see some raw data coming out. So let's run this real quick. And let's see how the data looks here. All right, so our product number now looks to have the dashes removed. I could have also removed the letters as well. And as I slide over here, we can see that some of our dates are actually invalid. So if I kind of look at this, we see the true, the suspect row here, suspect row there, and that's all I see. So let's look at these two rows here. As you can see, the new date for those suspect rows is on 1/1/2099 now. So pretty simple code, about 15 lines of code to ultimately cleanse bad data coming from the mainframe. Now, there's also a free component I want to share with you guys as well. As part of Task Factory Community Edition, there is a free component called the Data Validation Transform. It would have done this in a few seconds for us. Let me kind of delete that. All it does, I'll wire this to, just to show you real quickly. I wouldn't be showing this to you if it wasn't free. Oh, there we go. All right, so what I would do is I would ultimately say, let's say, for example, the sales start date. I want to validate if it's a date, hit the plus button, and it's a whole slew of like regex routines already defined. Like, look at this right here. Imagine writing that regex routine right there. So what we have here basically, so security addresses, email addresses, IP addresses, all those kind of things, it will basically create a brand new column. So if I say, is this a valid date? And I hit add, it basically creates a new column called sell start date, date, or is valid, excuse me. So then I can wire that up to the Terminator destination. Somebody's asking for me to explain that again. All the Terminator destination does is it acts as a dead end. So it allows me to kind of develop faster. I can just look at this. I know I have some requirements to do down here that I'm not aware of yet. I can put a data viewer on it now and kind of look at the data prior to having to write it to a table. So it's just kind of a sending data to a dead end. But as you can see, one of my new columns now is valid column. So that's a free component. There's the two free components you have: the Terminator destination and the data validation transform. You can download this from my website at Pragmaticworks. There's also another about 10 components that are free in that package as well. All right, so now we've done a little bit more about the scripting side. And I'll come back to the scripting a little bit later. But let me hop back to my slides one more time for the day. Okay, so a question here about from Jimmy here about how does that script transform perform with hundreds of millions of rows? For that type of script, that simple of a script, it would perform very, very fast. I mean, it would hardly be noticeable. It'd probably be milliseconds, not seconds. But it would be no problem at all. The other ones I showed you, the data validation transform, also very, very fast. Also, that's right, data validation transform, very, very fast also. You can use that transform, those Task Factory ones, in 05, 08, and 08R2. Doesn't matter. Okay, so if you start doing much more complex components, you might see a lag. So some of the components I'm going to show you in a second might have some lag with 100 million rows. So our next piece, so in that demo I showed you how to do some data validation and a little bit of regex cleansing with SSIS. The next component I want to show you is really around the fuzzy components. Now these are really, it's not how, and not often I would say this, but this makes data look pretty darn sexy. It's a pretty awesome component. And what this is going to do for you is it's going to dedupe your data. Now this can save your company hundreds of thousands of dollars. To save some of the companies that I've done work with in the past, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because now they're not mailing out a dozen brochures to the same Brian Knight. If I ask you tomorrow, you get that credit card offer, how many times do you get that same credit card offer that same week? With your maybe it's Brian S. Knight one time, maybe it's Brian Knight, maybe it's Brian the Y. It's all the same person, but they sent you 3 credit card offers, and they probably spent $4 mailing you that offer. There's a lot of wasted money that goes into postage because of that. So it's going to fix those kind of problems for you. It can also help you with misspelt words. So I'm going to cover two components here, the fuzzy lookup and the fuzzy grouping. Now these are Enterprise Edition features. However, there are some great articles you can find on BIDN or on SQL Server Central around getting around that scenario. We're using scripting to get around that. There's actually an open source fuzzy logic system called Jaro Winkler, and if you look at it, it's Jaro, by the way. And if you look for that, there's a DLL file that you can basically integrate right into SSIS, and you can script it very, very easily. It's tough. It's not as good as the fuzzy techniques, but it's pretty good. Now, after you do this, now some people that don't want to buy full Enterprise Edition for their server, what they do also is they'll buy a single server server license for SSIS. And all it does is it sits there and churns through data. That's all the server does, just churn through data. But they don't want to buy the full $20,000 suite. They just want to buy the server license. Nobody's ever going to connect to it other than SSIS. That's another way you can get Enterprise Edition also for that I've seen a lot of companies do. So with that now done, what I want to show in this demo is, let's say for example, we've gone to a trade show and we've gotten a lot of leads now. And I want to now dedupe those leads and load them into ultimately a table. But I also want to not just trust fuzzy grouping. I want to do some other things with that as well. I want to see, is this customer that fuzzy grouping selected as a customer, is it the really right customer? So how many transactions do they have? Those kind of things. Now I have some good questions here also. This session is recorded, by the way, for those that are asking. I have quite a few people that are asking. All right. So I have a whole bunch of, sorry guys, I'm trying to keep track of the questions the best I can, but I've got a few hundred now piled up, so I'm going to answer them as I can as well. All right, so let's open up this next package. Now this next package is going to hit a table where I've intentionally messed up some data. So let me preview some data here. So this is looking at my customer table. And as you can see with this record right here, I've got John Yang twice, the same email address, same phone number, a slightly different John Yang though. Different customer IDs. Now I'm sure a lot of you guys have this kind of problem where you've got an over-aggressive data entry clerk. They enter the data twice perhaps. We also have Elizabeth Johnson. This record looks to be an exact match, but notice in this case we've got an email address difference. We have the old email address and we have her new email address. We also have Marco down here. In one case it's a complete record with a middle name, and in one case it has no middle name. It looks like we have a slightly different information over here as well. So there's a few bad records like that that are clouding our system. So, so this will help us ultimately. I'm laughing at some of the questions that are coming in. So this is causing a problem. We're having to mail out brochures. We have duplicate data. So when I look up this customer, which one is it? That's where fuzzy grouping comes in. Fuzzy grouping is a really, really amazing component, and it was built by Microsoft Research in the 2005 days of SQL Server. Now, so I'm going to look at these customers, and I want to do some stuff with these customers now. The first thing that I want to do is I'm going to drag over a fuzzy component, a fuzzy lookup component. I'm sorry, fuzzy grouping component. Now, there are two types of components we can use, fuzzy grouping and fuzzy lookup. What fuzzy grouping does for us is it basically dedupes the data. So now I have one version of Brian Knight. I've taken Brian with a Y, Brian with an A-I-N, and Brian and Knight Brian, and I've deduped those into a single customer. That's what fuzzy grouping does. Fuzzy lookup is a different component. What it's going to do for you is now that I've got Brian Knight, B-R-I-A-N, Knight, now somebody the next day is still sending in Brain Knight, B-R-A-N-I, B-R-A-I-N, Knight. They're still sending in bad data. So what I can do is I can send the bad data in, and I can look up Brian Knight's customer ID from that. So very, very easy to use. Now both these components are easy to use. However, they can be a little bit sluggish sometimes. So they do have performance problems in some cases. All right. So let's look at how this component will work. Wow, we're well over 500 attendees also. That's awesome. So if I go over to my fuzzy grouping component here, there we go. Let me drag this over. Now, the fuzzy grouping component is very easy to configure. Basically, it just requires a connection manager. Now, this connection manager is going to be used to do a lot more work than what you think. It's actually going to stage some data on this connection manager, and it's going to run a whole bunch of extensive queries against that. A lot of this is going to happen in your TempDB database. So you want to make sure that your TempDB database is heavily tuned. Now, also, a lot of components in SSIS are not very CPU intensive. This component, on the other hand, is very CPU intensive. So you're going to potentially use a lot more cores than you would normally use. All right, so let's go hop over to our columns. And so I think, so if I go over here, a question here about is a fuzzy grouping synchronous or asynchronous? It is a fully blocking asynchronous component, so it could cause some slowdowns there. These components are also, to Carlos's question, built in to SSIS. So there's nothing to install it separate here. Everything's kind of built into what you have already. So in my case, I want to dedupe based on all these columns except for customer ID and maybe address line 2 and type. I'm going to ignore those columns. All right. Oh, Carlos, not sure why you don't have that. You may want to check to make sure you have Enterprise Edition installed, though. Yeah. Okay. So what we're next going to do, so I'm going to look at all these columns, I'm going to pass them all through, and I could say I want to make sure that first name or social security address is a 90% match. So on a column-by-column basis, we can say this column must be 90%, this column must be 50%, and so on and so on. We can be very, very specific about how close each column must be. Notice that all these right now are set to 0. That's because what we're going to do is we're going to base it on the entire row. So I'm going to say the entire row must be a 70% match in order to consider it a match. Okay? Now, we're also going to create 3 new columns from this. A column called key_in, which is just basically a primary key for this column. So key_in is an artificial number. It's an auto number starting at 1 and going down to 1 million or 5 million or whatever. It's an auto number, though. So it's representing the unique row for that row. There's also a keyout. What keyout is showing us is, well, I see that this is row 5, but it looks like it's the same customer as what I saw in row 2. So let me call the keyout row is column 2. Okay? So keyout will be 2 and key_in will be 5 at that point. I'll show you some examples of that in a second. So if you're a little confused, no worries. The score column is how accurate, how close this is a match. There's also a whole bunch of other columns that will be added as well. These are the primary 3 that are going to be added. Down here we can see what represents a new word. So from a performance perspective, you want to remove as many of these as you can because it's going to speed up your queries. So if I can remove things like these right here, for example, we might see a good gain in performance. So if you don't think you're going to use this to represent a new word, make sure you remove those now. But I know, for example, spaces and tabs and line feeds, those are all going to be new words for me. I'll hit OK. And let's look at the raw data now. So the person asked why I use the terminator destination. This is why. I want to do a quick iteration here and just look at what this did for me. I want to put a data viewer on this, hit the add, and OK, and OK. And let's look at how the data looks at this stage in the game. Okay. So as we can see, we have John Yang twice. Oops. Let me sort this by key out. There we go. Our key-ins. Can't quite see there. So you'll notice in the key-in column here, you'll also see the key-out column. Now isn't this interesting? It's saying the key-in is 1, but the key-out is 2. So in other words, what that's saying to us is, well, it looks like this John Yang right here is really the same guy as this record down here. So this is my master record. The one I have highlighted right here is my master record. So I'm going to direct the SQL server in this case to it. We should ultimately make it where we insert this record, not this record. Now it's basing that on a number of things. Using the most complete record wins. The same thing applies here. See, we recognize the difference there as well, and we recognize the difference here as well. So even though we're missing some values here and we're missing some email addresses or whatnot, it recognizes that as a whole, these 2 rows are 70% close in size. We also can slide over And we can see that it looks like there's a whole bunch of more columns on the right here. Some of those columns are how similar is the first name, how similar is the last name, and middle name, and so on. So every column has a similarity threshold there. So you're able to quickly diagnose all those problems within a few seconds here. Now, it's not actually deduping our data for us. We're going to have to do a conditional split to dedupe that in a second. But I'm not quite done. I don't trust this to be quite accurate yet. I could say let's go ahead and do a conditional split and send the rows that are where the key in and the key out are the same over to destination. We'll be good. However, what I want to do is something a little bit more advanced. I want to ultimately put some additional logic in this that's going to say, is this okay? I want to put the logic in here. It says, how many times does this customer come into the store? So I'm going to show Chad. I'm going to show you the conditional split in a second here, so you can see what to look at there. And what I want to do is I'm going to say over here, I'm going to drag over a lookup transform, and all I want to do is I want to find out how many times has this customer done a transaction with me. To do that, I'm going to set this to ignore, so if I can't find any transactions, I don't want to fail. And under the connection, I'm going to make a query that says, all right, this is how many total transactions I have for this given customer. And I'm grouping my transaction ID, or customer ID. So for this customer, tell me how many transactions I have. Oh, I forgot a step. I'm sorry. Let me do one more step before I do this. I want to assign a scoring system of some sort, some kind of point scale that's going to say, you know, who is the best record to insert in my database. So rather than insert those 3 records, I want to make sure I'm inserting the best record. To do that, I'm going to drag a derived column transform over. And what this derived column transform is going to do is it's ultimately going to be a score. I'll call this row score. And I'm going to put a column in here, and it's going to say basically if the key in, oh, I forgot my, let me just drag these down. I don't trust my spelling enough here. If the key in is equal to the key out, so in other words, this is the master record. To Chad, your question, this is your answer. This is what my conditional split would look like. If the key in is equal to the key out, that must be my master record. Well, in my case, what I want to do is I want to make that row score actually give a number. I want to put some kind of score on that. So if those two match, I'm going to assign that row score column, I'll give it, I don't know, 4 points. Otherwise, you get no points. No points for you. Looks like I have some kind of error here. Let's see. The colon, oh, I'm missing a colon there. So this is basically how you do if-then statements inside of SSIS. If you want to see these kind of statements, you can actually go to our website, go to the pragmaticworks.com/cheat sheet, and you'll be able to see all the cheat sheets like this with some predefined code. Let me hit OK. All right, so now we have assigned a score to this component. A lot of questions about the data validation transform. You can download that on pragmaticworks.com, go to our products page, then go to Task Factory, and then you can download the community edition of components of our Task Factory product, which is the free edition. All right, so does not require a license for production or development in that case. So I've got my lookup component. Now I want to drag over one more derived column transform. Now in this case, I want to assign a point for every transaction that you've done in my store. So for every transaction you've done, I'm going to give you 1 more point. So let's look at this transform. So again, this time I'm going to replace the row score, which is all the way down here, somewhere down here. So I'm going to replace that row score with whatever the row score is currently. Let me kind of expand this a little bit so you can see it. There we go. So take whatever the row score is currently, and then add how many transactions there were to the row score. So it's an easy way of basically just building upon, adding more and more evidence of which is the right record. If you're a retailer, maybe this is how many times they call my call center, or how many times this customers, how much money they've made over the customer over the past 3 months. It's whatever kind of metrics you think there is to represent a good customer. So I typically will have a whole line of these lookup transforms followed by derived column transforms. So this block of code will represent a pattern that you'll repeat over and over again. Okay. So next, a good question here: should the fuzzy lookup component be used? Isn't it dangerous to use it from a reliability perspective? It can be reliable. It's very, very reliable if you dovetail it with other kind of components like I'm showing you here. This is the and how does adding the derived column transform affect the performance? It adds almost no time at all to it. I mean, it's milliseconds going to add from a performance perspective. But the fuzzy grouping may take some time to run. What I'm doing from a reliability perspective is I'm basically saying if it's a 70% match, just group them together. Now that is a thing you want to test. That piece right there, that slide bar that I pulled up before to your question, from a reliability perspective, this is where the reliability is going to come in. You slide this left and right and you test it each time. It's not really a question for you as a technician. It's really a question for your business here. You want to say, all right, produce a spreadsheet that shows 70% match. Then produce a spreadsheet that shows 90% match, and let them tell you where they're comfortable at. The farther you slide to the left, the less dupes you have, but also you might aggressively dedupe the data, too aggressively dedupe the data. So you might lose a customer or two. So there's as a business rule there you have to kind of define. It's not going to be for you to define. It's going to be for your business, your person on the business side. Okay, so we've now done a combo, so we would keep on adding more and more rules. But basically at this point, we've added a certain amount of score to our customer. Let me show you what it looks like again. All right, let me drag Terminator over. There we go. And I'm just going to put a data viewer on here. Hit add, okay, okay. And let's run this again. All right, so there we go. This keep on, it's only 1,000 rows. So let's kind of look at these two rows right here, for example, all the way over. Now it thinks that the top one is the best record. That's what the fuzzy grouping decided. However, it looks like on further on the transactions that are actually happening, that the bottom one is. So we've used fuzzy grouping to kind of pair these two rows together. Now we can actually see that these are actually are more intelligent now. So now we can see, now that they're grouped together, we can see that this is actually the winning row. It does have great question here from Jim here as well. It is smart enough in many cases to recognize that, depends on how much evidence you have, but Bob and Robert are the same guy. So it has some black box algorithms like that to define. It also is smart enough to recognize that I did Knight Brian instead of Brian Knight. So it will be a very, very low similarity threshold, but a high confidence threshold, showing that the record is actually we're very confident this is actually the right record. By the way, for those that are asking about questions, you can ask the question in your GoToMeeting panel. So Persona, for example, you can ask it right where you type in for. I'm kind of answering a few questions now, but I have over 200 questions at this point that I'm trying to go through. So I'll do my best to get to them all, and I'll put my email address on the screen after we're done here. So what I've showed you so far is basically we've selected the winning record that we think is a winning record. So now I want to put that winning record on top and eliminate the losing record. So I'm going to do that a few ways. The way I'm going to do that in this case is with a sort transform. Now a sort transform is an asynchronous component. So it's going to be very, very slow in this case, but it's the only way of sorting the data the way I need to in this case. So what I want to do is I'm going to sort by the key out. Keep on the key out. It's going to put the record that we think is the good record up top, or it's going to combine the two records together. I also want to take a look at the row score. So I'm going to sort by this descending and this ascending. So I'm going to see the two Brian Knights together now, but the record up top will be the best Brian Knight. I could choose to eliminate the record at this point, remove the record with this duplicate sort value. I could choose that, and it would eliminate the extra Brian Knight. But in my case, I want to do something a little bit more trickier here. So I want, now that I have the right record up top, I'm going to use scripting to ultimately add a few new columns. Like this is the winning row, and I want to keep the bad record ultimately also. I'm going to put the bad record into a new table perhaps, or to a QA table or whatever. So my next step, now that I've got the good record on top, the bright Brian Knight on top, I'm going to drag a script transform over one more time. Okay, I'm going to drag it over from the sort. Now again, this is going to run slow. The fuzzy grouping and the sort transform are going to be slower components. So if I go under the fuzzy grouping, what I want to do in this case is I want to add a column here. Let me go back over to my input columns. I'm going to pass in the key out, and I want to go over to my input-output columns, and I want to add one more column as well. I'm going to call this column winning row. And then I'm going to go call this a Boolean as well. So I'm going to be able to say this row on top is the winning row. He's my winner. All right, now let's set the script here. Now, the script is not rocket science, not very complex. All I'm going to do is I'm going to create a local variable here I'm going to use. All right, so on top of this, I'm going to create a variable here called myKey. So I'm basically localizing the primary key, the key out. I'm going to basically loop over the records now, and let me kind of open this up real quick. There we go. And let me paste some code in here just to kind of simplify this for our time. All right, there's a lot of comments in the code, but really the code is only about 6 lines of code. All I'm doing, keep on looping over each record, and I'm saying, and I've initialized the variable to -1. All right, so I'm saying if it's -1, then all right, you're a winning row. That means I'm looking at the first record in my batch. I, of course, need some try catches and all that kind of stuff here. This is just raw code. Else, all right, I know you're not the first record anymore, so that means this is what the most of my rows are going to fall under this. If the myKey is not equal to the key out, so if whatever the variable is here is not equal to my present one, that means you're the first row in a given batch of rows. If I have 8 Brian Knights, that means you're the first Brian Knight. That means you're the winning row. Else, you're not the winning row. So let's make the winning row false. Okay. Now after my my if statement, I'm going to make the myKey equal to my key out column. So that way the next loop, next time I see Brian Knight again, I'm not going to say he's a winning row. So pretty simple code. Again, this is on and I'm a DBA. I can even do this. And I put this on my blog in case you guys want to look at this later. So after I'm all done, my last step is to drag over a conditional split. This is a lot of code, I know, guys. And hopefully I'm not losing you here. But the conditional splits component, this is a really neat component. And all it's going to do is basically a case statement. And all I want to do is say, if you're the winning row, and I can say equals true with 1 and 2, that means you're the winner. Otherwise, you're the loser. Okay, so it's basically an if-then statement. If this is true, then you go one path. Else, you're my loser path. I could have also done VB.net to even do the partitioning as well. So I could have created 2 outputs inside the script component as well. It's a little more advanced than what we have time for today. So to erase, you're absolutely right. We could have done that as well. So after we're done with that, I want to send my bad rows maybe one place and my good rows a different place. So let's send my bad rows maybe to one path here. All right, so let's send them down to, where'd it go? Oh, no wonder. All right, I'm just going to use two terminators. You guys know how to write to a SQL Server table, so I'm not going to worry about that. All right, I'll send my good data this way, my winners this way, and my losers this way. I'm going to put a data viewer on a loser table so you can see that one as well. All right, so when I run this again, we're going to hopefully see at least 3 rows removed. There we go. There's our 3 rows. So we're seeing this case. So ultimately, we can, oh, everything okay, Rachel? Okay. Rachel, I think you muted by accident. There we go. So we have
I did. Your
rows
audio is breaking up, but you sound fine.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you. So we have 3 rows here that we can ultimately, now what I would typically do at this point is I would put them into a QA table or maybe an alias table of some sort. So we would have what most customers want is they want an alias table that says, hey, when I search for John V. Yang, I want to redirect you over to the new primary key, which is going to be the winning primary key. So if I go over to here, all the way over here, we'll see things like the winning key, the winning rows over here. See phone clean, first name clean, middle name clean, last name clean. This is the record I would actually insert into my table, my alias table. So when I search for John V. Yang, I want you to return the clean version of John, not the dirty version of John. So I can create an alias table to help my searches so that my primary keys all still work. So the fuzzy grouping component is a really, really handy component, and it helps you with really, really raw bad data. It can save if you're marketing, if you're mailing out brochures or doing calls. It can save your companies hundreds of thousands of dollars from mailing out bad letters. Again, think about how many credit card offers you got just yesterday in the mail. Well, I didn't get any because my bad credit, but most of you guys probably have good credit because you're in the technology sector, probably got a lot of credit card offers. So, Rachel, I think we have some time for questions now. I want to put up my contact info one more time.
Great.
Let me do that real quick. Okay, let me open up this one more time. And guys, we've got current slide. I have a ton of questions here to answer. Again, my Twitter address is at Brian Knight. The slides that I used today and my code is all on BIDN. It's on my blog right now. You see on the screen. You can also find our YouTube channel really helpful. And if you want to find a recording of this webinar, you can go to pragmaticworks.com and go to webinars. All right. So let's see here. What kind of questions we have today? So so some components here around that. Barry's asking about why don't we use multicast? Why don't we use other components like multicast or as I said, Terminator? To me, it was just it's that if the metadata changes above it, it handles the metadata changes above it much easier. So that it doesn't actually do any work. All right, so let's see here. The examples are in the download. I'll actually include that today as well. The question also, the Enterprise Edition. You can also use everything I did today in Developer Edition also. Fuzzy grouping and fuzzy lookup is an Enterprise Edition feature. However, Developer Edition is the Enterprise Edition, just licensed for developers, not licensed for production. All right, all the code is in the slides already, but I'll put the packages there as well in the databases. No problem there. All right, now a good question here about scalability. On the scalability side, the fuzzy grouping component may have some scalability issues. And let me show you some ways around fixing the scalability issues. One way, if I go to fuzzy grouping, you'll see under Advanced, I can take out some of these limiters here. You'll also notice over in Properties window that there are properties like, oh, this is the fuzzy, I'm thinking of the exhaustive. So right now, if I turn on the exhaustive to true, it's going to even do more work to find matches. So it's a lot more accurate, a lot better, but it's also a lot slower as well. Question from Ravi. Will the profiler, the profiler task that I showed earlier, will it work with Sybase and Oracle? It'll work with any ADO.NET provider, so it's got to be ADO.NET friendly. So if you can find an Oracle provider that's ADO.NET friendly, no problem at all. I've done one recently with Oracle, had no problems with it. All right, so is it fairly easy way to log the count of the rows? Yeah, so what we could have done over here, this is from Wendy. Wendy, what we've done was we would have added a row count transform on the losing path here, and we would have written that into a table somewhere, Wendy. It's a great question. Okay, let's see here. Wow, a ton of questions here. Let's see. So a question here about the webinars. What is the URL for the webinars? Best way to find it, just go to pragmaticworks.com, and on our homepage, you will find a webinar link right here. All the webinars are upcoming ones, and also under products, you'll see Task Factory, and under Task Factory, if you hit the download, you will be able to download the free edition right here. That's the free edition. Okay, it also comes with a whole bunch of other components, about 20 components. Cheat sheets are on our site. They're at pragmaticworks.com, and it is /cheat sheet, I think. Let's see. That is right. And here's a whole bunch of expression language, MDX code, all sorts of goodies there. All right. Question from John Gay. The question was, why not use a sort transform to remove the rows? That's a great question, John, and I thought I mentioned that, but I must have missed that. What I would have done in a sort transform right here is I could have checked this option right here to remove the components, remove the duplicate rows. And that would have solved my problem, but in my case, the business case for what I was trying to accomplish in my case was ultimately to flag the losing row and not remove the row, just move it to a different table instead. So it all depends on what your business case is. Question here from Robert Pearl. What is a good recommendation for scripting in SSIS for a book? There is a book called, the Pro SSIS book has a whole section on scripting, which is really about 80 pages long. There's also a good scripting book from Donald Farmer, wrote ages ago. That's pretty good as well. All right, we're down to the last 2 minutes here. Do you have a list of tasks that are coming with the new list task factory? We actually have 20 new components. We have Twitter sources. We have dynamic sources. We have a whole bunch of new components coming out. I will post those later today on my blog. No problem. All right, so how to use the fuzzy lookup instead of the fuzzy grouping. So the fuzzy lookup is a great component also. Let me pop up some code real quick and show you how we would do that. So what we would do there is typically, let's go to data flow. And what I would do is I would drag like an Excel source over, for example, data here somewhere. And I've got some customers, some US customers here. And they're in a table, my sheet here. And they look a little bit like this. And as you can see, I've got some misspellings here. So all I'm going to do is I want to pass in their information and get back their customer ID. So I have some misspellings, though, like Redmonds, Washington, for example, somewhere here, and a whole bunch of misspelled words. So to do that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag over, and typically you'll do a regular lookup first, but I'm going to just jump the chase here and do a fuzzy lookup. Again, you want to do a regular lookup first, not and only do the fuzzy lookup if you can't find a match. I'm going to point to my customer table. Okay, I have one right here. So you'll see in customer table, and then under columns, I'm going to pass in all these columns and try to get back the customer ID. Again, under advanced, I can set a threshold of how close the rows must match. And then I'm done. It's going to find the one best record for that. Same exact UI. I can actually right-click on this column and say Edit Mappings and say that this column must be a 90% match by changing this, and the row must be a 50% match. So all those kind of things will work for you. All right, guys, that's about all the time we have now. If you have any other questions, please feel free to give me an email at bknight@pragmaticworks.com or tweet me. And look forward to seeing you in the future webinar. Next Thursday webinar is with Patrick LeBlanc on CDC with SSIS. Have a great day, and Rachel, I'm signing off now, I guess.
Okay, so am I. Have a good week, everybody.